Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Forrest, and I am a of counsel at Littler Mendelsohn. We are so thankful to the judges that have joined us today, Judge Sheri Polster Chappell and Judge Beth Bloom, and to our panelists, Brandon Breslow, Phil Rothschild, and Tucker Mata, for a silly on federal clerkships. One of the highlights of my career, and quite frankly, my life, was doing a clerkship for Judge Chappell, and we just thought it was so special that we wanted to provide a program to talk about the role and importance of the federal clerkship system. So how we're going to structure it today is we'll ask some panel questions to the judges here from 12 to 12:30, and then we will switch over to the panel of former clerks and ask them some questions about their experiences in clerking. And before we get started, I understand that Judge Williams is in the audience as an attendee. Lainey, in the background, I don't know if it's possible to maybe switch her into a participant, because I do want her to be able to answer questions as well. But in the meantime, I guess we can go ahead and get started. So, first questions for the judges. Judge Chappell and Judge Bloom, how do you approach the process of identifying and selecting your law clerks?
Judge Bloom, do you want to go first?
So in terms of selection, I've been very fortunate that many of the law clerks that I've been privileged to work with have either been referred by someone, whether they're at a firm or in a law school. So my approach is when I see a candidate that I feel I want to get to know better, we have a team approach. So I'm fortunate to work with 3-term law clerks. So the 4 of us talk about the candidate, and then if we feel that that candidate should be interviewed, then we have an interview with the candidate, and then I will make the final decision. I have 3 terms, but they're staggered, and they're each 1-year clerkships. So I don't go through Oscar, or I did. It's not as if I have not, but I've just been fortunate the last couple of years that that was how the selection began.
And Judge Chappell?
Yeah, I would just back up just to say Fort Myers is a very small area, so we don't get as many applications as some of the bigger cities. So I often will advertise on Oscar, on our court's website, and then also talk to the local bar organizations, inns of court, and get referrals, oftentimes from former clerks or current clerks. So just kind of that's the realm. Certainly we get applications that come in periodically in the mail, but I try to post everything as soon as I know that I'm going to need a clerk. We take the same kind of team approach. I include, in addition to my career clerk and 2-term clerks, I also include our courtroom deputy, who works very closely with chambers. And so she kind of has a different perspective as well on selecting the clerks. So we take that team approach and hopefully come up with the best candidate to work in chambers.
Okay. Now, in terms of the clerks that you prefer, is there any differentiation between clerks that are coming right out of law school, or maybe those that have already worked for a year or two?
So Sheri, I can. My philosophy is that I really appreciate some experience. So I have not, as of yet, hired a law clerk right out of law school. I look for some experience that is transferable. And I also look for diversity in terms of the type of experience. For example, just a snapshot of my chambers now. One of of my law clerks was a public defender and a state attorney, 2 years each, so had 4 years of experience. And we met while teaching in Boston, and he had never clerked, so he wanted that opportunity. And my second clerk worked for a public service law firm, and then my third clerk worked for a law firm in New York. So I feel like there's enough of a different perspective and experience that can be brought to chambers. And I also want to comment on something that Judge Chappell said that I truly feel as well, and that is the team approach is so important because in chambers, I think you can see my office behind me, but it's a small chambers, and with three law clerks plus a courtroom deputy that's in chambers. It's it's a small space, and what's important is that everyone that works together becomes a family. And so it's important to look for individuals that also want to be part of a collaborative team, but also to contribute and recognize that there is that diversity among each of the individuals that work here.
From my
Now,
standpoint, as far as experience, Ryan, I generally tend, like Judge Bloom indicated, to hire individuals who have some experience. I find I was a magistrate judge for 10 years and I've been a district court judge for 13. As a magistrate judge, I found that it might be a little bit easier to hire someone with less experience because of the nature of some of the motions that the magistrate judges work on. Extensions of time, discovery issues. Those are things that I think are a little are easily handled by somebody who's just coming out of law school. When you get to the work of a district court judge and you're dealing with dispositive motions, summary judgment motions that can, shut chambers down for a good deal of time, it really helps to have someone who's got experience in file review and filing motions and things like that to kind of delve into the work. And both the Southern District of Florida and the Middle District of Florida have huge caseloads, and so having somebody with experience is I think instrumental in moving those cases through the system efficiently and effectively. Not to say that I would never hire somebody without experience, but I think it helps to have a little bit of experience under your belt before coming to the court.
yeah, definitely. Now, what does your hiring timeline look like, and how do candidates that want to best position themselves do so?
So I can start because we really are a family, and I think that we all share that sentiment. My term is 1 year with the option that if one of my law clerks needs more time, for example, if there's an offer but it's not going to begin until 4 months later, then I'm not going to make a decision to hire someone until my law clerk lets me know that he or she has another position at a certain point. So it's not a strict, on the 15th of October. And as I said, it's staggered. So I have someone that comes in on or about October, November, then someone on or about January or February, and then someone now in April or May. And I do that strategically because we have a very robust summer intern program. And I like the law clerks to be kind of up to speed in terms of what we do so that they can then teach the interns and be there for the interns over the summer. So June, July, and part of August is a very active time, not only for me, but for the law clerks, because they're very involved not only with our six that are in chambers, but we oversee the intern program through the Southern District. So there's about 120 summer interns, and then we also oversee the Judicial Intern Academy, which is another 61 students throughout the country and here in the Southern District. So it's strategic in terms of when they come on board.
Awesome. Judge Chappell?
Yes, I mean, some judges have a very strict hiring plan where they, hire every September, every year or every 2 years. I prefer a 2-year commitment from the law clerk, so I will ask them right off the bat for a 2-year commitment with the opportunity to review their performance and things after a year. And I really don't hire until I know that my clerk has a position. And then that's when I really start my hiring process. I ask them to let me know, a couple of months, maybe a couple, 3 months beforehand, and then I'll start the hiring process then. So I don't really have a very strict hiring process. I like them to be able to have a position before they leave the court. Sometimes that's not always possible. I like to keep things staggered, but sometimes when you accommodate those law clerks going out to firms, things get less staggered than they used to. But I try to do that, and I've been very fortunate. I've had clerks who have stayed for 4 years, and so I don't want to be in a position to close them off from staying if they want to stay. And then, of course, they have termed out and they have to either become a career clerk with another judge because I have a career clerk, or they have to, go out into private practice.
Now, moving from the nuts and bolts of the terms and the hiring process, now once a clerk is hired, how do they tend to grow most during their clerkship? And in your experience, what makes a truly outstanding law clerk?
I'm gonna go.
Go
Well,
ahead.
certainly,
We're going BC,
yeah.
Bloom, Chappell.
Well, certainly intellect, but also intellectual curiosity, strong organizational skills, a great writer, because much of what the law clerk does is writing. Also, I think a lot of intuition, and that comes from experience. And case management is important, and that's why for me, having a skill in terms of whether it's with a law firm or a public agency, or even in the public defender, state attorney, that they've had that case management. They've handled cases. They know about the path of a case. They know about deadlines. So there's a rigor that's required, and also humility. I must say that humility for me is very important, and that is the understanding that we don't know everything, but that we're willing to find out the answer, and that's where that hunger to get to, as one of my clerks says, I love solving puzzles, and oftentimes in a complex case, there are many puzzles, and so those are the skills that I look for, but I also go back to wanting to be a team player. Because my door is always open. Each of the law clerks, their door is always open, and we do a lot of collaboration. And even though the division in the Southern District, or at least in where I work, is based on the digits, so 1, 2, 3, we'll go to one clerk, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the 0 will default. We collaborate on a lot of issues. Now we have a lot of habeas petitions. I'm sure that Judge Chappell has as well. And many of the issues are overlapping issues. Many of the issues are unique issues that will repeat themselves. Many are cutting edge. We just had an 11th Circuit opinion that resolved many of the petitions that were before the court. So that's what I look for, and I know every judge is different, but that I think makes a great law clerk.
Thank you. Judge Chappell?
I think foremost they have to love the research and writing and understand that much of what they do is sitting at a desk for that period of time and doing that. And as Judge Bloom said, a curiosity for the law. I think that's something that's very helpful. I think Judge Bloom and I could work in each other's chambers because we seem to be giving the same type of answers, but I'm a big team player person. I really am. We staff cases together, and I think that's always very useful because each law clerk thinks a little differently, and sometimes just hearing how someone else thinks about an issue can help you. Somebody who has some common sense and has the attention to detail that it takes to be a law clerk, especially as Judge Bloom said, with the number of cases that we have. You really have to have a handle on deadlines and dates and when things are due and be able to multitask. Sometimes I come off the bench, and I know Ryan and Tucker, you both worked with me. Something came up in trial and it's all hands on deck. Everybody drops everything. It doesn't matter if you're working on a summary judgment motion or a motion to dismiss. Everyone drops everything and does the research that's needed to be done during that 15-minute break before I go back on the bench. So somebody who's able to drop things if they need to, pick something new up, work as a team to come up with a solution, and then move forward. And as Judge Bloom said, somebody who doesn't necessarily, they need to take ownership of their cases, but also understand that ultimately it's my name that, on the signature line. So to work with me to get the best product to go out the door for the attorneys and the litigants.
Yeah. I know that I'm a moderator and not a panelist here, but I can't tell you how many times that I popped into Tucker's office or any other clerks that we had there and just tossed an idea around. Or when I came and knock on your door, I think those things really enhanced both the rate of getting things done, but also the quality of things that were done. And moving from, the actual substance of the job to maybe a 30,000-foot view, what do you see as the best part of the clerkship system for judges, for clerks, and the legal profession more broadly? And because we've been staggering BC, 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 we'll just keep that cadence going.
Okay. I think what is most beneficial to a law clerk as well as an intern, and I know we're focusing on law clerks, but many of the law clerks have been interns and recognize the value, is really seeing the judicial system from the other side, so to speak, is understanding the mechanics of how the court system operates. For example, the court registry, a default. What is a default final judgment? What are the scheduling orders and the requirements? Why is it important to get out the order on a dispositive motion before the pretrial stipulation? It's an ability to understand it from the court's perspective, and it's also an opportunity to learn from the other two law clerks, as well as I hope that they're learning from me as well. But it's an ability to really work for the court, but with the court, and have an appreciation of the importance of striving for excellence, to make sure we get it right, to make sure that the issues that are presented in the particular motion are fully addressed. So that we have a thorough order. And I know that Judge Chappell spoke about, we have 3 interns or 3 law clerks, but we have 1 judge. So the voice is very important. I don't like snark. I speak in a third person, the court, and there's a structure to orders. At least for me, there's the background, always the standard, discussion, and the conclusion. And in chambers, we start with the burden and the standard. And so I think that that's important for a law clerk to appreciate from the court's perspective, what's important to the court and why is it important, and to share those values and that attention, and hopefully that vision that they'll carry forward as they continue on their journey as a lawyer. I see Judge Williams here. How are you, Judge Williams?
Oh, I'm just loving technology as I do every single day. I've had 3 IT people and 3 very, very technologically savvy law clerks, all trying to get me in. And here I am.
Welcome, Judge Williams.
Mhm.
I guess we had a few initial questions about the hiring and selection process and the growth of clerks during their clerkship. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about that as well. And then we
You
could
wouldn't be
go back
remiss.
about.
You can just roll on through to wherever you are.
Well,
Don't feel remiss.
well, then I still don't want to miss the opportunity. How do you go about the process of identifying and selecting your law clerks?
Well, even though you couldn't see me, I could hear all of you, and I kept trying to send messages, and that wasn't working either. We did consider pigeons, but all we have here in the Southern District of Florida is roosters and chickens outside. I think my methodology is resonates with Judge Chappell and Judge Bloom in that I have my current team of law clerks at any given time, and they go over what I receive in terms of applications, and they'll vet them, and then they'll sit down with me to talk about those they find compelling and all the others. And based on that kind of review, we'll choose people to talk to on Zoom, maybe not in the future, but we have been using Zoom just to have an initial conversation with people. I hate bringing folks in from California and New York unless we think it's important to really have them come see me and go from there.
Okay. Now, in terms of clerks in growing their skills and the actual work that they do, how do they tend to grow the most during their clerkships with you? And in your experience, what makes them stand out as an outstanding clerk?
I just heard Judge Bloom talk about the voice of each judge, how it's going to be different and how clerks need to adapt to that. But I think they are best able to do that if they've developed to a degree their own voice in writing. I often ask applicants what literary figure would they compare their style to? Are they, Balzac, or are they Hemingway? Also important that they know who those people are. But I think one thing that you acquire during your clerkship is a confidence about your voice. And again, I think both judges talked about the capacity to frame an issue and identify an issue and then go straight to a clear analysis of those facts and the governing law. And sometimes I have my summer interns here. Sometimes with interns and law clerks, you get a first draft of something and it's more of a exposition, policy, the state of the world. And the better law clerks know how to go immediately to what is the animating issue in this case and how, as a judge, I can get to the critical facts through the law that I need to apply. So I think if all goes well in a clerkship, they learn to use that construct in addressing a legal matter.
Knowing Judge Chappell pretty well, I think that matches what she would say too. And also about favorite author or the writer, it would be Roth Guberman, someone just getting right to it.
Okay. I'm all about that. Misogynist though he was, I'm a fan of Hemingway's style, not necessarily his life choices, but that's art for you.
Yeah. And since we have you on the hot seat here, what do you see as the best part of the clerkship system for judges, for clerks, for the legal profession more broadly, or even any relationships that develop because of that?
Well, I think I don't know if it's the best for the legal community. I don't know that I've thought, but I think the best dimension, the best thing about a clerkship is the community that it develops and sustains. All of my law clerks are all on a text together, and they email, and the relationships you develop as a clerk, I think, translate into your capacity to be a great lawyer. You know, there's always a group of people you can call on to give you sound advice, not necessarily, again, and that's what I look for in a law clerk, not necessarily what you want to hear, not necessarily what somebody who thinks they know you thinks you want to hear, but what you need to hear. And I think the law clerk family, I think Judge Bloom referenced that, and I think Judge Chappell too, is it has no real I don't know, equal in business or law. It is unique. It is sustaining, not only for a judge, but I think for the law clerks themselves. And to me, sometimes people ask me, what's the best part of your job? And that's one of the best parts of my job are my clerks.
I couldn't agree more as the clerk on the other end of that relationship. So I'll tee that up for Judge Chappell as well. What would you say is the best part of the clerkship system, Judge Chappell?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with the camaraderie and the ability to, have those individuals through life. I mean, as you grow, you continue to grow with them, and you text them and you call them and you have lunch with them, and things are the same way that they were, 10 years ago when they clerked with you. So that is important. But I mean, I think from the clerk standpoint, if I'm looking at what would be a beneficial part of the job to me, is you see good lawyering and you see bad lawyering. And so as the clerk and learning to, write in that neutral voice of the court, I think you analyze that, the good and the bad, and you learn what flies with the court and what doesn't. What arguments should you make and what shouldn't you do? Isn't it more important to take your most, strong argument and give that to the court rather than throwing up a bunch of things to see if they stick against the wall? So I think from a clerk standpoint, you have all of these wonderful people around you, but you have the ability to learn those very important things about, who's a good lawyer, who's a bad lawyer, and what makes them a good lawyer and a bad lawyer.
Yeah. I don't know if you were going to ask me my opinion, but I want to say that I agree completely with Judge Williams and Judge Chappell, and I'm sure that you and become the leaders in the community. When I look, I've been on the bench in the federal court since 2014, and when I think about where my law clerks are, who started out as kind of a mentee, I was their mentor, but then they quickly became a mentor to the interns and chambers, and now they're out in the community leading. I mean, one is a general counsel of a major firm, one's a general counsel of a college, one's a tenured professor at University of Florida. I mean, four are partners in major law firms. So I look at where they are, and they're also connected to their community, not only here in South Florida, but those that have gone to New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. They are leaders. And I think a lot of that was learned or appreciated when they served as law clerks. I'm not saying we taught them. They just learned that just through the environment of being around other great lawyers, and having the opportunity not only to teach, but quite frankly, to pay it forward. And so it is a select group of individuals, but I think they are so select because they are now leaders. Like one of my law clerks is now a magistrate judge, and she's devoting herself to public service, and that speaks of who they are inside and why they've chosen to be a law clerk. It's not just for the prestige to get to the next step. It's because they truly care about public service. So I think that that's a great value to the community.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I remember clerking for Judge Chappell and wanting to soak everything up like a sponge there. And now, as we go through our lives, I see Tucker. I clerked with Tucker, and he's in house. And I have another groomsman that we clerked with that is a partner at a law firm. And I have cases in front of another clerk that came after me that is now a magistrate judge. And it just it fills me with pride to know that I'm, part of that group and we're moving on together.
Yeah.
So that's a good through line to sort of transition over to some questions for the current practitioners and former law clerks. We've got Brandon Breslow, Phil Rothschild, and Tucker Mata. And I think let's go in alphabetical order here as far as respondees. It seems to have worked with us for the initial portion. Let's talk first about finding and applying to clerkships. How did you go about identifying and searching for clerkship opportunities?
I assume alphabetical is me, both in first
Yeah.
name and last name. So I have a pretty non-traditional path to finding my clerkship. I only ever applied to one clerkship, and I happened to get it because of the circumstances that led me to find that judge. I was planning on clerking when I was in law school. I, had all the boxes to check, right? Top of the class, publication experience, all of that. And I ended up finding a job at a boutique white collar criminal defense and appellate firm here in Tampa, the firm I'm at now, Kynes, Markman, and Felman, and worked there out of law school instead of pursuing a clerkship. And so I did that for a few years, and I found myself trying, mostly, I would say 95% of my work was doing federal and state criminal defense work as well as some appeals. And I found myself trying a case in federal court in Gainesville. It was a federal misdemeanor, so it went to the magistrate judge there, Judge Gary Jones, who was a commercial litigator in South Florida, was a magistrate judge in the Middle District, and then a magistrate judge in the Northern District. And so I had a trial there, and it was a wonderful experience, not just for the outcome, but also just to have that under my belt. And I was in my third year of practice, and I was after that, shortly after, grabbing lunch or drinks with friends of mine who had clerked and talking about all the things they were doing and on the civil side of federal practice and a lot of other things that they did because of their clerkships. And notwithstanding all the great things I was able to do without clerking, I still thought, I would still want to clerk. And that thought never really left my head. And it just so happened a few months later, I got a posting or an email or something to the effect that Judge Jones was looking for a law clerk. And my wife has family in middle Central Florida in Ocala. This job would have been in Gainesville. And I applied, and having tried the case, it was not a mystery of who I was. And so we talked about that experience. The reason I say it's non-traditional is because Judge Jones was upfront that in finding his clerks, he usually picked law clerks right out of law school. He liked to educate them about the law. He himself was an adjunct professor for many years. He liked to educate them about the law. So all this to say is that not every clerkship experience comes from looking at Oscar or following posts. I believe that sometimes the practice of law for younger lawyers can present itself, as even Judge Bloom mentioned, finding one of her law clerks while teaching up in Boston, because there is I think connection might be too strong a word, but a similar path that can bring a practicing attorney to a judge who is in need of a law clerk.
Hmm. Thank you for that. Tucker, I'll take you next since you're the M and then Phil is the R.
Thank you for clearing that up because I wasn't quite sure. I think I was I guess, traditional in the sense that I worked for 2 years as well. So I was a civil litigation for 2 years. I worked at a firm. I don't think coming out of law school, I thought much about clerking. It wasn't because I wasn't interested. It just never really like kind of crossed my radar as something that like I absolutely have to do. But something kind of Brandon mentioned, I think, boiled down to it, it's like what opportunities present themselves. And I think after, working for a little while in private practice, I realized, hey, that is something I wanted to do. And maybe it hit me a little bit late, and maybe that just shows, I might be a little slow on the uptake for some of these things. So I, took whatever opportunity I could. I looked at Oscar, I looked at direct searches. I think looking at various judges' websites, sometimes they have postings there. Reaching out to people who might be clerking, who might be your friends, any sort of opportunity you can kind of take advantage of is something I'd recommend for somebody who wants to clerk, right? I ended up clerking in Fort Myers and I loved it. I mean, I'm a South Florida kind of native on the East Coast, but not necessarily something that I thought I would go to, not necessarily a place I thought I would land. But it truly was wonderful. But I think taking advantage of whatever opportunity in whatever way you can, if you decide that you want to clerk, would be my recommendation.
Okay, Phil.
Thanks. So also non-traditional, started my career at the Federal Trade Commission in DC, met my future wife in DC, moved to South Florida, worked at a small firm for a year, and then they partners sort of went their respective ways. I was not looking to clerk out of law school because I'd worked a couple years in between college and law school. So when I was looking for a job, I was always very interested in federal court work. And I saw that Judge Dimitrileus was going through the confirmation process. And I thought, you know what, this could be good. My wife was also a litigator at the time, and I think we'll find it's hard when both spouses are both litigators. So not that clerking is easy, but it's a little more predictable usually. Anyway, so I was Judge Dimitrileus's first law clerk. And if we're going to drop co-clerk names, David Hames, who's a circuit court judge in Broward County, was my co-clerk. So loved it so much, and Judge D was such a great person to work for, and I kept in touch. I clerked for him for 4 years, did a little job search, but ended up being Judge Ken Mara's first law clerk for 2 years, and then he moved from Fort Lauderdale to West Palm, and then I was Judge James Kahn's law clerk for 8 years. So started as a term clerk, was a career clerk, and helped the judges then vet resumes, and I can talk about that on another question. And so anyway, kept in touch with all three judges. The whole family analysis analogy that the judges talked about is all true. And so that was my path.
So that's a really good segue point. The first question I have that would arise out of that is there anything that you strategically did during your career or any decision that you made that would best position yourself for a clerkship to be attractive as a candidate? And then I can open up the floor to everyone here. Are there things that you have seen when you're vetting resumes or vetting potential clerks that are no-nos that make someone less attractive as a candidate? So we'll start with Brandon and then go around the room as well.
So I think on the point about positioning yourself for a clerkship, it's really if you're doing it in law school, obviously top grades, publication journal experience, moot court, trial team, advocacy board experience. Internships are huge, especially here in the Middle District. In the Tampa division, a lot of the clerks who are picked right out of law school tend to have interned in the courthouse or were externs through a formal program. That's huge. If you're in practice, it can vary. Trial experience helps because there are just so many trials, especially in Florida's district courts. And then you have obviously writing. writing is going to be huge, just to keep up with the things that judges wouldn't want from their law clerks to show that practice will help while in the clerkship role. When it comes to resumes, and I did not have that in the position that I had, so I hadn't vetted resumes with my judge or done clerkship interviews, but I have talked to judges and other clerks, and the main thing I can talk about from a no-no perspective is walking into the interview like you're, the uh, second coming of Sonia Sotomayor or Neil Gorsuch, pick your justice, right? Um, there are a lot of really great applicants out there. And so the interview matters because, like all the judges have said, you're in a team environment and you want to have a personality match.
Yeah. Right.
And Tucker, what would you say is anything that you did to best position yourself, or anything unique you have about that would make a candidate less attractive?
So, Brendan nailed a lot of stuff that I may have said, but I think the big thing is like you're going to spend a lot of time writing. You're going to spend a lot of time writing in maybe somebody else's voice and trying to mirror that and put out the best product you can as for the judge, and then hopefully the judge can run with that or tell you what they may want changed. But I think part of what I did to prepare, in addition to maybe seeking out any sort of a writing assignment I could or volunteering while I was at that firm for more tough writing assignments, was really diving into maybe like the nuts and bolts of writing, right? So there's a lot of great published artists, published authors out there. I know Ryan maybe has brought up Ross Guberman during the session, but you can really go through there. You can work on your writing. You can work on all of those things that make you a more attractive candidate. And that comes from hard work. And candidly, it's just getting reps. It's going out there and going over and over and taking constructive criticism and maybe checking your ego at the door if a partner or somebody else kind of takes that red pen and bleeds all over your first draft. But I think that way will set you up well for, if you get that clerkship, you can kind of hit the ground running, hopefully.
And Phil?
I agree with everything that both Brandon and Tucker said. And I'm only, of course, speaking for myself and not the three judges I worked for, but I would not have anything political on your resume from either side, even though, contrary to what is in the media, I think the judges shy away from people who have specific, and are putting it on their resume. It's obviously okay to do it, but I wouldn't put it on my legal resume. So that's just one. If you're looking for a potential red flag, that would be it. And then obviously the writing sample is critical. It really should be something that you did yourself and not substantially edited by a law review panel. And then, you got to be yourself as in the interview, because it's not just a family, it's a family usually in cramped quarters, at least in the older courthouses. So you're really on top of everybody. And you mentioned getting advice from the other clerks. My role was a little different than I was the career. And so the term clerks would absolutely also stop in to talk to me because the judge is on the bench. So so that personality fit, which is not anything you can really research for or plan, you just got to be yourself, and those would be my tips.
Judge Bloom, is there anything you think uniquely that candidates do to make themselves less attractive? Any red flags that you come across in the process of applications?
So I was trying to think of red flags, but I have a big green flag, at least for me. And
Okay.
a big green flag is teaching experience, whether it's in law school, whether it's volunteering and teaching. But since so much of what we do is teach, whether we're teaching by writing an opinion, whether it's through our interns that are here in fall, summer, and spring. I mean, they're here throughout the year. We have a large number of them. The law clerks are always teaching, and I think that that's actually what I look for. If someone is, and each of my law clerks now have each had their own respective teaching experience, which they're able to bring into the family, so to speak. So I don't have any red flags, but that's a green one.
Okay, thanks. Judge Chappell, do you have any green flags or red flags for applicants? Oh, you're muted.
No, I was the head of the IT department, would you? Yeah, the automation committee. I should have been helping. I can tell you that, obviously a lot of people that apply for the clerkships are very, very qualified. I looked for somebody who's going to be part of that team. I look for somebody who's good lunch material. Do I want to have lunch with them? Do they have interesting things to say? Are they going to fit in? I think that's great. Are they good at, baking cookies for chambers? All of those things are important. As Phil said, I really don't like the cover letters where they say, I can't wait to work for an Obama judge, or wow, you're a Trump judge. And I can't believe that people are putting that first and foremost in their letters. That does turn me off, personally. And then I can tell you that when you do get an interview, you should not do it from the back of a taxi in New Orleans dressed in a t-shirt, because that is not a good way to get a clerkship, at least with Judge Chappell's chambers. So, and yes, I could write a book about some of these things, but I actually had someone do that who was very credentialed and whose resume was absolutely, outstanding. But yeah.
Judge Chappell, do you find as well that sometimes you receive applications where people say they have extensive experience with this or extensive experience with that when it's not possible, and then maybe it's just more authentic to say like, I did this, I did that. Would that be a red flag that you commonly see as well too?
Certainly in some of the cover letters, they use some of those buzzwords that I think they find, in the dictionary that should be impressive to the court. And sometimes I think they oversell themselves. Somebody much more humble, I think, would draw my attention more than somebody who's just really trying to oversell themselves. Because, as I said, most of the individuals who apply for clerkships are very qualified, and they don't have to oversell themselves. They just have to sell themselves.
Thanks. Judge Williams, do you have any common green flags or red flags?
Um, I don't think we're going to be able to beat Judge Chappell, honestly. That's one for the books. Although I must say, I did actually receive an Elle Woods scented colored resume, and I thought, this person does not appreciate satire in any meaningful way. So that was a problem. And the cover letters, my significant other once said, I don't know why you're being so mean. And I said, if this person cannot proof a cover letter, if I don't have a subject, predicate, noun, verb association, then what am I going to be worrying about in terms of orders? But yeah, colored paper, and also if you are applying to many judges, which is perfectly all right, please double check that you don't send Judge Mike's letter to me, because I'm not Judge Mike. But I also concur with Judge Chappell. Baking, huge in 11.3. I mean, you may have not made it to a certain review, but if you can bake, I've had several bakers, by the way. They've gone on to great careers. That, and if you were in the heyday of print journalism and a baker, no interview needed.
So, two last questions here. One for the clerk panel, and then one for the entire floor. The first one is, as far as interviews go, what did you do to substantively prepare for your interviews? Did you look at Senate confirmation materials? Did you read, published opinions? How did you go about preparing, if you recall? Starting with Brandon.
So I went and looked at anything published about my judge or really by my judge, right? It so happened there was a Federal Bar Association article about his time on the bench in the Middle District, so I was able to read that. I learned it was known that he was a big Gator football fan, so I learned a lot more than I normally would just by watching every season. Because it interviews do tend to bleed into personal interests of both the judge and the law clerk. And then I did some self-reflection as well, because I think the judges are all spot on, and this is their prerogative to ask really anything about your interests and your reading habits and what TV shows you watch. My interview did include a segment on what movies and TV shows had recently watched, and so I think that there's both reflection on the judge you're interviewing with as well, or research on the judge you're interviewing with, as well as some self-reflection for questions that may come up both about you as a person and you as a, lawyer or student at that point.
Tucker?
Right, so Brandon has nailed it as usual here. So I agree. So I did a lot of research that I could into Judge Chappell when I had my interview. I found out everything that I could that was available, whether I was checking the Westlaw dockets to see kind of published opinions and just see style of writing, that kind of thing. And I know that I spent a lot of time practicing, maybe if it was questions that you might see, right? So a lot of times you can go on and you can find those questions, and I'm not saying have a completely polished answer, because obviously everyone keeps talking about personality, and I think you need to let your personality come through. Because at the end of the day, if you are hiding your personality, everyone's going to find out pretty quickly. So I also did some self-reflection and kind of, on those answers and those questions. But I definitely did my research. I definitely tried to have all the names right. And I went in there and, kind of let the personalities shine through a bit.
And also to add on to that, I know that uniquely you had an opportunity to phone a friend in terms of asking. We knew one of our mutual friends and groomsmen was also a clerk for Judge Chappell, and I have no doubt that you called him and said, "Hey, what is this like?" And I know personally through the years afterwards, people have called us to ask us about what clerking for Judge Chappell is like. Did you find that valuable in preparing for your interview?
I did. I mean, I think it's like we talked about earlier with like the opportunity, right? You take, whatever opportunity is presented, you make those calls, you ask the questions, and you try to get the information you can. And I've definitely had applicants who have called me about Judge Chappell since, and I'm happy to share, some information there. But yes, I think you should pull whatever information you can. And I'm not saying, oh, go find out a social security number, but what does Judge Chappell might like? How does she like her chambers to run? Those kind of things. I definitely did that, and I would definitely recommend, other people do that if they are lucky enough to get an interview.
And Phil?
Nothing really else to add. I think researching the judge is entirely appropriate. If they're an appellate judge, they might have more opinions that are available. So and the profiles, as Brandon mentioned, I think all of that is important to do, just so you don't say something about, I hate those kinds of movies, and turns out that was the favorite movie. So yeah, that was all good advice.
And now turning it over to the judges, is there, in terms of interviewing, are there green flags or red flags that stand out in the interviews? I guess we can go BCW again here.
So I guess we all are a product of our own experiences, and I guess I worked throughout my college and law school. So I'm always looking for the essence of the person that tells me that their story shows true grit and resilience. And so a lot of the interview will not be about movies that they like, but more growing up, and maybe at a time that they failed and what they've learned from that experience, because their successes are on their resume. But I want to find what makes that person tick? Why is it that they want to work with me and with everyone else in chambers? Why this position? Why now? And why them? And so for me, that's more important than the surface of books and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I get into a very deep conversation about their life, and that tells me a lot about that person.
Thank you. Judge Chappell, any green flags or red flags in interviews?
Well, I think it's important for them to go into an interview having at least read something that the court has written, just to get an idea. Obviously, we have their writing sample, but as Judge Bloom said, I really like to get to know the person. And I wasn't kidding about, are they lunch material? Is this a person? You spend a lot of time with your law clerks, and we've talked about them as a family. They have to have the ability, right? They have to have the ability to read and write and research and do all of those things, but they have to be somebody who's, hard worker and just wanting to do the best job that they can. And, I'll ask questions about, if something's going wrong in their life, who do they go to for advice? I really like to get to know the person, because this is somebody I'm going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time with. And I want them to enjoy their experience just as much as I want to enjoy the experience working for them. So those are really important things that I see too. It has to be a good fit. It has to be a good fit.
Thanks so much. And Judge Williams, any green flags or red flags in interviews?
I guess red flags would be, references to things that I've written or things that I've done that are really a superficial reference, because when I follow up with, well, why did that speak to you, and what dimension of that did you find most compelling, and there's no answer, then that's just an interview technique without any real substance. And I think I am echoing what Judge Bloom and Judge Chappell said, but you're looking for substance, even though it's a very limited amount of time you have with people. But I'm looking for whether someone actually has a sense of humor along with a very prodigious intellect, because this is going to be a chaotic experience with the work. And I want to have someone working with me that can sit back and take it all in, and stay calm and keep going to the next project. And so in some ways, the questions about TV and books lets me see if this person can even articulate a little bit of themselves, while I try to go a little deeper than that. And if I have difficulty at that level of conversation, then I'm pretty sure it's going to be harder to kind of get that next layer of the onion peeled. So it's a, there are a lot of intangibles, and the lunch table is the absolute perfect example, because I remember from my days as a federal defender, one of the questions my supervisors would ask when someone left was, well, he seemed brilliant, but when we send him to FDC, are they going to steal his lunch money? And if the answer was yes, then it wasn't likely you were cut out right then and there to be a federal public defender. I don't have to worry about people mugging my clerks for their lunch money, but I want to know that they can interact with each other on a daily basis, and me, in close quarters, and let their intellect guide us in the most important decisions for all our litigants, but also let their personality make it possible to spend 10, 11 hours with them every day, and wake up and want to come back and spend 10 and 11 more hours.
Yeah, exactly.
That really sums it up. And I also see that we are at 104, which is time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And also, thank you so much to Judges Bloom, Chappell, and Williams, as well as our panelists. As Lainey put in the chat, by the way, I also want to thank Lainey. Without her, none of this would be possible. Another shameless plug, please come to the Federal Judicial Roundtable at the Florida Bar Conference, which is in 2 weeks on June 18th, I believe. The CLE number here is 9797. Thank you very much.
Thank
Court
you
is
so much.
adjourned.
Thank you.
You
Thank
well.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.